Thank you so much. My name is Camille. I've been with Eurofins Calscience for about 7 years now. We've dealt with stormwater this entire time, so we're very familiar with the stormwater events and seasons and the client's expectations and requirements. I do have my laboratory director here, Linda Scharpenberg, who's going to do the presentation for us from, more of a background laboratory point of view standpoint. So kind of a different perspective than what you're used to hearing, and you can see how the lab's going to operate during these stormwater events and what you can expect from a lab, and just all the qualifications that it takes to analyze these types of samples. So without further ado, Linda.
Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Scharpenberg. I'm the lab director here at Eurofins Calscience, Irvine. My guess is a lot of you have attended a lot of the presentations that get more in-depth into like the general permits for industrial construction, stuff like that. As we start our presentation, we're going to touch a little bit onto this because it is an important topic. The data that we generate for you guys from your stormwater events lets us know how well control measures are working. If your personal stormwater control approach for your site is meeting your discharge requirements. So we want to give you an overview of stormwater in general, and then kind of how to work with your lab when you're submitting samples, how to look at data, how to get your data, that type of stuff. So that's what we're here to help you with. Basically, stormwater defined, y'all probably know this already, but the EPA calls it a runoff. It's generated when there's rain or snow, and it flows over land or impervious surfaces. It can't get into the ground. It doesn't get into the ground when it can't sink into the ground. It really has nowhere to go. That's where the potential for pollutants and hazards to enter our waterways exists. That's why it's such an important topic. They say hazard, why? It's just water. Well, it's a nuisance. It mobilizes pollutants such as oils and pesticides, chemicals, trash, animal waste even. It flows into water bodies. It can get in there through our sewer systems, and it can create a major source of pollution in our streams, rivers, lakes, wetlands, oceans, etc. One thing to keep in mind, most stormwater runoff flows directly into these surface bodies of water or down the nearest storm drain, and it's not being treated at all. There's no treatment that's happening with this stuff, and that's where the dangers arise. So rain's in the forecast. Because of the pollutants and hazards that we know runoff can carry into these surface waters, folks like you and municipalities, construction companies, industries, you guys use controls to help capture and filter out these pollutants, and you try to control it at its source. Oftentimes, you guys will have a stormwater pollution prevention plan, an SWPPP. Now, under this program, we have what's called Npdes, or the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, and that's what regulates discharges and runoff from municipal stormwater sewer systems and industrial and construction activities. This was created under the Clean Water Act, and it basically says operators of sources that can contribute to this may have to obtain an Npdes permit before they can actually discharge stormwater. You're not having to treat it perhaps, maybe you're having to capture it, have it hauled off. So there's something that the regulatory bodies are going to want to look at. A little background on Clean Water Act. It basically prohibits anybody from discharging anything considered to be a pollutant through what they call a point source, i.e. a generator source, into a water of the United States unless you have a permit from Npdes. And it's that permit that's going to tell you what you can discharge, and it's going to tell you how to monitor and report what you are discharging. It's also going to provide other provisions to make sure that the discharges do not negatively impact either water quality or human health, because it all ties together. So your permit basically translates the general requirements of the Clean Water Act into specific provisions that are tailored to your facility or your discharge streams. So it's going to be more targeted into what you're actually doing. It's not going to be very broad necessarily. Now, compliance, monitoring, and enforcement under Clean Water takes place largely at the state level. In fact, 46 states have their own Npdes programs. The EPA has authorized them to monitor them themselves and take care of it. And under Npdes compliance, we have our own arm here in the state of California. It's called the State Water Resources Control Board, or some people just call it the Water Board or the State Water Board. And under that, we have 9 regional water quality control boards, and you'll hear like Los Angeles Regional Board or San Francisco Regional Board or Santa Ana Regional Board sometimes. And these arms are there to help assist with compliance and enforcement. In fact, the State Water Board actually allocates rights to the use of surface water, and they, along with the regional boards, are meant to join together to help protect surface, ground, and coastal waters throughout the state. So it's the regional boards that are issuing the permits, and these permits are what govern and restrict the amount of pollutants that can actually be discharged into the ground or body of water. So the Npdes program here in California regulates discharges from 3 potential sources: what we call the municipal separate storm sewer systems, or the MS4s, construction activities, and industrial activities. The permits that are issued by the regional boards are implemented under the statewide municipal stormwater permit, the construction general permit, and the industrial stormwater permit. I think there was just a recent update in 2020 for the general permit under industrials. Either way, each of the 3 permit types apply to a discharger based upon predetermined criteria. The nice thing is all 3 permit types have some elements in common. You'll hear a term called Tmdl, or total maximum daily load. And this says how much can be generated from a source that's going into one point source, so we know what's going into a water body. They have existing regulations in the regional water board basin plans, so they can help address impaired water bodies and make sure we're not over inundating them. And they're adopted by regional water boards of the US EPA. So these are Tmdl numbers that are put out there to say you can only do this, you can only discharge this, you're overloading this system, so we may have to go to a different type of capture or cleanup measure. The thing that we take away from the permits, really that ties into this topic, is what they call the sufficiently sensitive analytical test methods. And that's kind of where the lab comes into play. Because when you're selecting a laboratory, the EPA is going to want you to pick one that you can trust the data. So they're going to require things like participating in a discharge monitoring report program. You'll hear it called the DMRQA, and annually you might have to submit PT sample results from your lab and have them deal with your regulatory body or your permittee. You want to have a lab that's approved by the National Environmental Lab Accreditation Program, NELAP, and if at a minimum in the state of California, California ELAP. And you want to make sure they meet your needs from a data quality and customer service standpoint. You know, if you're not happy or they're not getting what you need, it may be time to make a change. The other thing to keep in mind is labs have got to be certified for and use approved methods that are actually found in 40 CFR Part 136. They've got to be able to generate an analytical report that gives you chemical concentrations for the constituents that you're looking for. And there has to be backup data that goes with that from a quality assurance standpoint. Things like method blanks and lab control samples, some kind of matrix QC has got to go with that. That's how we know the lab is in control in generating what we call data of known quality. So that's an important aspect. Some of the key points on testing when it comes to Npdes permits is, again, specifying the use of standard analytical test methods for water quality analysis. So again, 40 CFR Part 136 is going to be your friends. The methods will be specific to the industry and permit types, and a lot of what we see, we deal with a lot of industrial clients here. General permits, you're normally going to see things for total suspended solids and oil and grease. Those are the things we see here, but you may see VOCs, you may see metals, you may see pH, hexavalent chromium, depending on the type of industry you're in. There's a lot of things you might see, but the permit will spell it out. Another key point is requiring the use of analytical methods that are, again, sensitive enough to detect and quantify what we're looking for, where that minimum level of quantitation is at or below whatever the water quality criterion is specified for that pollutant being measured. And it'll tell you what that is in your permit. And you're going to have things called numeric action levels. You're going to have Tmdl numeric action levels and Tmdl numeric effluent limitations. And these are all the things in your permit that you're going to want to compare to the analytical report from the laboratory. One of the things that we do want to jump to is, if you're dealing with anything going out into the ocean, is the California Ocean Plan, because they have their own minimum levels, and it's in Appendix 4 of the State Implementation Plan and Table 2 of the Ocean Plan. And it's similar to TMDLs, and this is, sufficiently sensitive. You've got to represent the lowest quantifiable concentration in the sample based on the proper method and the basic, the proper analytical procedure. The ML is defined specifically as the lowest standard concentration in the curve. That means we can defend it. We can defend that data. It's equivalent to what a lab might call a reporting limit or a limit of quantitation. We use these for reporting compliance determination purposes. Again, think reporting limit. And questions to bring up with your lab sometimes is to meet the minimum levels of the Tmdls or your permit limits. You may have to talk with the lab about developing low-level versions of analytical methods. Check with the lab and make sure they can truly meet your needs with a defendable point on the calibration curve. Again, an RL, an LOQ, things like that. Because there's a lot of detection limit terms used in the analytical field. Most commonly, you'll see labs on your analytical reports with two types, what we call a method detection limit and what we call a reporting limit. The method detection limit is basically a calculated value. It's a theoretical number that appears when we do certain testing in the lab. The thing behind the Tmdl is that it's something that we say is above zero with 99% confidence. So we have some confidence that that value is above zero, but not necessarily confidence that if it's a 5, it's really a 5. It could be a 2, it could be an 8. So the Tmdl is a little bit of wobbly kind of technical things, but some labs have to report down to the Tmdl to meet your permit levels. The reporting limit is the minimum concentration, again, minimum, sensitive, we're looking at these types of terms, that can be consistently quantified because it is supported by the lowest calibration point. And I don't want to go into, calibrations and all of that stuff. Just know that the lowest point on the curve is a point that we actually analyze and can see within a certain range of control. So we basically validate that we can see it. And so the number that we report in your report at that level, we can defend that data. So as I said before, most labs use what are called reporting limits when they're giving you analytical results. The RL, that's that legally defensible quantitative value supported by the low calibration standard, which is a requirement for minimum levels. And it's what you would normally use to compare the limits stated in your permit when determining compliance with your NALs, TNALs, and NELs, even Tmdls and things like that. The Tmdl, again, it's a statistical value that's generated for an analyte and a method. It's an estimated value, so it doesn't have as much defensibility from a legal standpoint as the reporting limit does. So again, keep in mind a value the lab may have to report down to if they cannot provide an RL that is low enough to meet the permit limits. And I know that in certain areas, there are some challenging constituents of concern out there that they want reported at a very, very low number. So sometimes labs are going to have to use an MDL. Just make sure that your regional board or your person out there is okay with that and they understand that. And if you do have a contaminated influent source or a midpoint source or even maybe an effluent that's got some breakthrough, if the lab has to dilute a sample for any reason, whether it's the constituent of concerns concentration or it's just the presence of basically junk in your sample, you will see an increase in RLs and MDLs that may take you out of meeting the permit criteria. But all of that stuff is spelled out on a laboratory report. So common stormwater parameters, like I said, TSS and oil and grease are the two biggest ones that we see here. But you might see some phosphorus, some nitrogen, some TOC or total organic carbon, and the metals are big. You might see, again, hexavalent chromium specific to certain industries. Just read the permit, take a look at it, see what the reporting limits are, what you're going to be comparing that to, and make sure that the lab is providing you with a report that meets your needs for that permit in that event. So the lab's role is to give you data that tells you if your stormwater control report approach is meeting the discharge requirements, your effluent limits. How do we assist you during these events? Well, number one, Eurofins Calscience technical support. We're working with you to set up your analytical testing. You've got a permit. They're telling you you're going to have to sample. You pick up the phone, you call us. We put you on the phone with a project manager or a quoting person, and they're going to work with you, go through your permit, look at what tests are needed, what reporting limits or detection limits are going to be needed for your permit, and help design the plan that you're going to need. We're also there at the back end answering data-related questions if you get your report and don't know. I'm always willing to jump on a call to help answer questions regarding data. And project managers will do that for you as well. On the front end, we're going to give you sampling support. We're going to provide your bottle kits, your containers, your coolers, chains of custody. We're going to receive your samples and provide accurate logins. So what you're asking for, we're doing. We're going to provide you analysis per the chain of custody with that quality assurance and quality control data mentioned previously. This is what you're going to want to have for your lab. And you're going to have timely reports and data delivery that can come to you in multiple forms through our total access webpage. They can email it to you. They could mail it to you, I guess, if you wanted. But it's all there. It's full service for what you need for stormwater.
Linda, this is Aaron.
Yes.
Quick question. We have a question on the chat. And the question is, do we need to request the lab to report JFlags, or does it happen automatically?
We would like you to request that. We're, like I said, we're going to report to the reporting limit, but if you need to report the MDL, let us know that. It's not a problem.
Okay, so putting an MDL on the reports isn't an automatic thing?
It is not. It's however you want your project set up.
Because I know back in when they approved the permit that was enforced as of 2015, and I first started receiving in reports, the ad hoc reports for the Industrial General Stormwater Permit required that MDLs be reported in the reporting. And most of the labs were completely caught off guard with that. And so every lab I had to work with, I had to let them know, please add MDLs to your reports. And now it seems, it seems to be more automatic. Whenever they see IGP reporting, they seem to make that, it seems pretty much automatic now. So that's why I think that question was asking, is it actually truly, you know, it's probably pretty much automatic at this point, I would think.
It should be, and that's one of the questions when you're setting up your project with any of our PMs here or getting a quote for work. That's the type of information we would want. We have some savvy people here who've worked with stormwater for years, and I know that the IGP permit, there was a 2015, didn't they just update it in 2018 and when it's supposed to go into effect this year? I don't know if it actually did. But those are the conversations that you have with the individuals here to say, this is what we need to be compliant with this.
So
and those are the types of questions.
Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off. I think you just answered a question. We have another one in the chat that says, can a company set up their profile with the lab to always test 2 MDLs? And I'm assuming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why we want you to reach out, and we call it working together, basically. You let us know what you need. We'll tell you what we can and what we can't do. And quite honestly, we can do a lot. There's very little we can't do here. We're compliant with most programs all over the United States. So it's just a matter of letting us know, and we set up the project that way. And the project doesn't change unless you need it to be changed. So on our end, it's just doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that kind of turns into this slide, quite honestly. Contact your project manager. Let them know you might have a compliant rain event coming up. Let them know the pollutant parameters and whether you need RLs or MDLs. You know, make sure the permit criteria is being met. And let us know if you do have short holding time methods on your projects and on your permits. We want to know that. There's a lot of, BODs like a 48-hour holding time. pH is supposed to be a field test. Nitrate's a 48-hour holding time. There's certain methods that you need to get to the lab as quickly as possible. And understand this, when you guys are dealing with the lab, any lab, not necessarily just Eurofins, when it rains, everybody out there who's under a permit is probably going to be sampling. And a lot of those samples show up at one lab at a time. So if there's a lot of stuff coming in that's short hold, labs only have so much capacity. So that early communication, that contact with your project manager at your lab gives you them a heads up that it's coming and allows us to better service you. And tied in with that, if you need a stormwater kit, your bottles and COCs, let us know well ahead of time before it rains. We get a lot of calls at the last minute here saying, oh, I hear it's going to rain today, I need a kit. We prefer to prepare these kits weeks in advance and get them out to you so you're prepared to go to the field when it looks like it's going to rain. And if it's going to be a heavy rainy season like it was a couple of years ago, we recommend that you order all your kits up front and just have them ready to go. In general, 4 events per year, per sampling point are needed, depending on your permit and program. And kits can have as few as 2 containers or more than 10, depending upon your permit. So giving us a heads up allows us to have the supplies on hand, get the kits prepared, and get them out to you. We do request when you guys do receive your stormwater kits from us that you just check them. Check them for sample bottles, make sure nothing's broken, make sure everything's there that you need, and that'll be outlined on an order form. When you deal with Eurofins, you talk to your project manager, they put in literally like an order form into our system that is filled against. It's like ordering food at a restaurant. We put everything in we're going to need, the people in the back fill it and have it ready to go. We also want you guys to have your containers, a cooler, ice, and a chain of custody available. And the lab can provide everything but the ice, quite honestly. And yes, ice is needed unless you're going right from your sample point to the lab. You're going to want to make sure it's on ice and chilled at 4 degrees. Again,
Linda,
if it's the same thing, sampling. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I do have a follow-up thing on that slide. That's why I wanted to jump in there real quick. There's a question up here asking, if we use your lab, do we need to use your COC exclusively, or can we create and send you our own COC?
You can use your own COC. We only ask that everything is on there that we need. The chains of custody are the first thing that get attacked on a court of law, basically, for any reason. So it can be challenged. So if your tests aren't on there, your sample IDs, your sample collection points, the sampler, the date, the methods, all of that information, if it's not there, they can challenge it for legal reasons if they want. I mean, if there's a problem. So go ahead.
Yeah, great. That's what I want to know. So we can, but you got to make sure it better be thorough.
Yes.
Secondly, there is another follow-up question. What is the shelf life of a kit? When should we replace it?
So most kits, there's 2 thoughts. If you have what we call unpreserved containers, it's just a poly bottle or a glass container that has no preservatives in it, no hydrochloric acid, no sulfuric acid, no sodium hydroxide, anything. Up to a year, as long as the kit is not left like in a garage with gasoline or, stored out, where it can get damaged, about a year. Anything with a preservative in it, we would say no more than about 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So after you've got your kit and you've checked it, it's raining, go get your samples. We want to make sure you're completing a sample label for each container. You're going to need sample ID, date and time collected, who's doing the collection, what type of analysis, a preservative type is there is one, and then affix the container, fix that label to the container. My recommendation is complete the label and then put it on the container. I've seen guys in the field trying to write on a wet container that's, label that's affixed to a container, and it can be challenging. Make sure your chain of custody is complete. Same info that's on the label is going to go on the chain of custody. And the lab can give you pre-populated COCs for your methods. And all you do is fill in like a date and a time that you've collected it. They can have everything else on there. You just have to work with your project manager. We do ask that you put containers in resealable bags and bubble bags for glass. We provide that as part of our kit. Then put it into a cooler with ice. Include the COC in a resealable bag and tape the box up for transport. From our lab, you'll normally get things in a box, and I'll show you a picture of that right after this. Because I do want to reiterate on the chain of custody, you must have on there your discharger name, address and phone number, who's collecting the samples, the sample container ID and the collection points, the date and time each container was collected, what type of matrix, in this case it would be water, and is there a preservative? There may or may not be, could be preserved, unpreserved, what type of preservative, the analysis that is required for each sample container. And you always, 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 when you drop samples off, want to make sure that you sign and date that COC when you leave it at the lab, that the lab then receives, signs and dates that COC at the same time, and that you get a copy of that. There will be a copy of it in your report, but you're going to want to take a copy with you to make sure that it's all done correctly. So packing the cooler, 5 quick pictures. This is kind of what a stormwater kit looks like coming out of Eurofins Calscience, Irvine. We like to use the styrofoam boxes. They're light. We can ship them out. I know sometimes the clients don't like it because there's no handles, but these are quite light. And normally you're only putting 2 or 3 containers in here. So you should be getting a COC if you need it. There might be a blank one or pre-populated. your containers, your sample labels, bubble bags, resealable bags, even a garbage bag, and a piece of absorbent material that'll be in the bottom of that cooler. So once you've collected your samples and labeled them, stick them in the appropriate bags. Use the garbage bag as a liner for inside the cooler. Put your sample containers in there, put your ice in there, tie that bag off. Tie it off nice and tight. Put your COC in a Ziploc bag. After you put the styrofoam lid on, put the COC on top, tape your box off, and either hand deliver it or send it to us by commercial carrier. Hand delivery, we're normally here 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and we're here on Saturdays, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Please keep in mind the sample holding times when you're looking to bring samples into the lab. We'd like to get them as quickly as we can. Again, we tend to get, when it rains, a lot all at once. Bring the cooler with samples on ice. Again, if it's the same day of, like you've just collected the sample and you're coming straight to the lab, there is a way that we can note that and you'll still be okay. Just make sure you do what you need to do to get it to us.
Linda, I have a couple.
Bring us a Yes, sir.
One, wet ice or blue ice, which would be okay?
So we prefer wet ice, and the difference is wet ice will actually chill something down. Think of it this way: if you're going on a picnic, you're not probably going to use blue ice to chill down warm soda. You're going to use wet ice. Blue ice is great at keeping things cold, but it doesn't have the cooling efficiency to cool something down. It'll warm up instead of cool something else down. We prefer wet ice.
Now, there's another follow-up question to that last one. How about dry ice?
You do not want to use dry ice. Normally, if you've got water in a glass container, it's going to freeze and break the container. And if you're shipping by FedEx, they have specific shipping regulations that you're going to want to make sure you're familiar with. So dry ice can be a little tricky.
And then there's another follow-up question. Does your lab have a courier service?
We do have couriers. For stormwater season, it's rough for us to provide courier services because, again, everybody's sampling at the same time, and our bastion of couriers is fairly small, 3 to 5 people that we have running around from basically Santa Barbara to San Diego. So it's hard to get to everybody. So we do request that you FedEx them into us or you drop them off. If we're there to pick up other projects because we're doing other work with you and the stormwater is there, we'll obviously grab it. But it just depends. Again, working with your PM, we can see what we can help you with.
Well, I mean, for certain constituents that have a short hold time, I'd imagine they'd want them to get dropped off right away. But for the standard 3, you know, the pH, oil and grease, and 12% solids, and since pH is going to be done in the field anyway, is it really that critical to have them there immediately after a rain, or they can pick it up within a reasonable amount of time?
We would like to get them into the lab within 24 hours. With the 48-hour holding time, that gives us then 1 day to work on it. So we want to make sure. And the 48 hours is 48 hours. It's not like 2 days, midnight of the second day type of thing. It's to the hour.
Thank you.
So we can provide FedEx labels to you. Oftentimes the labs will work with you where they'll give you what we call a prepaid FedEx label, and they'll just charge back the cost on your invoice, or there may be a flat fee charge depending on where you are located. So there's ways we can help try to make it more efficient for your guys in the field. Okay, commercial shipping, right where we were. We want to make sure it's tied in a knot, taped off, complete the COC. Once we get the stuff here, the PM will email you a copy of the received and signed COC to you along with other pertinent information regarding your samples. You'll get a sample login acknowledgement. It'll say we received your samples. Here, please look this over. This is telling you what we think we need to be doing based on your chain of custody. Give us approval to proceed, or if there's changes needed, please let us know what those changes are. So that's kind of important for us. We want to make sure that you guys are, requesting a quote up front so we know what's happening, that we review your permit if need be, so we understand the analyses and whether or not we can meet your reporting and detection limits, that we understand how many sampling points and kits you're going to need, and where you're collecting. I mean, we get stuff literally from all over the state that's shipped into us via FedEx and UPS. It is helpful if you do request project-specific COCs. But if you don't, make sure that when you provide us COCs, they are complete and accurate. And to help us out truly, review your sample receipt notifications within the 24 hours from when the project manager sends them to you. And if there are changes, get them to us as quickly as you can. That way we make sure we can still meet holding times, meet turnaround times on our end. So that's kind of an important thing for us.
Great, thank you. There's another question that came in.
Sure.
I have heard that labs can upload IGP data right into the ad hocs on Smarts. Is that true, and is that something that you do?
Okay. So yeah, so we can generate what's called a data deliverable thing, or an EDD. It's electronic data deliverable. We can provide that to you, and that is uploadable to Smarts.
And that would be something.
So we don't actually do the.
Go ahead.
I was just saying that is
to have your project manager work. You'd have to talk to them about that ahead of time and get that set up.
That's correct. Okay. Yeah, we have an automatic one apparently set up here now, where you just let us know you need it, and it's part of the project, and you'll get that. Touching base back on labs, quality assurance is a big consideration. This is data supporting discharges that can affect human health and the environment. So making sure you pick a lab, again, that was certified, that does the 40 CFR methods, those things. Making sure, in general, that these labs have a QA system. If they're accredited labs, they're to have a QA system. That's part of the accreditation process. And we want to make sure that they're providing you with essential QC or quality control samples that are prepared and analyzed alongside yours. And we touched base on an earlier slide on this. Positive and negative controls are important, and we do this to monitor tests. Are we creating contamination in your samples? Are we really getting out of them what we say we're getting out of them? You know, are tests defined that can handle the variability, and can we get precision of the data? Do we use replicates or duplicates? Does a lab have in place measures to assure the accuracy of test methods? You know, is calibrating a pH meter. It's no different than tuning up your car. You want to make sure it's running optimally so that the stuff coming out of the tailpipe, the positive and negative controls, and the precision data is as accurate as it can be. And that we're evaluating test method capabilities so we understand what detection limits you're going to need, what's your quantitation limit, you know, that we have all of this in place. And all of the accredited labs that are under NELAC or even California ELAP should have QC like this in place. That shouldn't be a question. What is a question is it showing up on your report? Do you see a method blank? Do you see what we call a lab control sample? Do you see matrix spike data? This type of QC sample tells you something. Method blanks, they tell you if there's contamination introduced by the lab. If the method blank is clean, that means the process that your sample went through is clean and we're not contributing anything to your data. We run lab control samples, and that demonstrates performance of a procedure. We actually process a known standard in a blank matrix, run it alongside with your samples, and if we get out on the back end what we put in on the front end, we know that our system is working optimally, that we're recovering what we say we can recover. We can also spike your sample to see how the matrix impacts it. Now, it's a little more challenging for stormwater to create a matrix spike, but if you use a lab for any other purposes, you're going to want to have matrix QC involved. You're probably not going to collect, 3 or 4 liters of a discharge during a stormwater event to do one analysis. It's easier just to fill up one jar. So mostly what you might see in your reports is a method blank, a lab control sample, and possibly a lab control sample duplicate for the tests that are being reported. And that would be fine. That's showing that you have precision and accuracy and you're not receiving any kind of contaminated results from the laboratory. But sometimes you're going to see, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We have another question. It is my understanding that labs outsource some of their stormwater constituents to subcontractor labs. Does your lab do that?
We will not do it unless we are completely over capacity. We have a pretty good capacity for stormwater because we've done it for so many years here, but our sister lab in Garden Grove would become an arm that we could use if we needed to. They are similarly accredited as we are, but in general, it's not something we routinely do.
Thank you.
On your report, you might also see what we call data qualifiers. They're these little letters and numbers and symbols that are basically a shorthand way to indicate if there's a potential analytical issue. When it comes to data defensibility, you want to know what's right and you want to know what's wrong. You just don't want to hear one side of the story. So labs will use qualifiers in the report to kind of give you a heads up. Anything that can impact the data, we're supposed to tell you about. So we use qualifiers in this case, and it lets you know what we call acceptability or quote validity and limitations of the data. So if you have a blank that's contaminated highly and the blank is contaminated at a level above your discharge limit for an analysis like oil and grease, then you know you can't trust your oil and grease data in your sample necessarily unless it's very, very high. So these are some of the things that you look at. And a lot of these questions come up, and those are the types of questions that are great for a project manager to help you work for, or a lab's quality assurance team, or even myself here at Calscience Irvine. Just know that all labs report qualified data at some point. Just because you see a qualifier doesn't mean your data is bad. It's just saying, hey, take a look at what's going on here. Not only do we qualify data, but you should also see some kind of what that means, what that qualifier means, and there should be something stated in your narrative on your report to kind of let you know how to interpret that data at that point. Common flags you might see, E flag, the concentration's very high, and it's an estimated value, but different than a J flag. A J flag is a little tiny number, an E flag is a huge, large number. And the other one you might see is a B, and that just means that your method blank, as we've discussed, has an associated hit at a level, but maybe the data's maybe the samples are at a holding time, or there's no remaining sample, so the data is going to be reported at is. Normally we would do some type of corrective action in the lab if we have sufficient sample and holding time to re-prepare and reanalyze that to try to get you what we call kind of clean data, but flags, they will show up. And again, reporting formats. Make sure you understand your deliverable types. Again, J flags reporting down the Tmdl with the IGP. That's part of it. You've got EDD options, the easy upload into smarts when we give you that EDD. And there's easy ways to access your data when you're working with Eurofins. We have total access online. We can have it sent to you. You can pull it off online whenever you want, or it can be emailed directly to you. You can also see kind of the status of things if you're in total access and have that set up. And that's another thing that your project manager can help you get set up on. It's an easy way to access your data. But just as kind of a general thing, each Eurofins lab that you might deal with, and again, most accredited labs, give you a report that is prepared with the intent of providing the highest level of analytical data of known quality in the testing industry. Our business here is objective scientific measurement. The numbers do matter, no matter how tiny they are to us. And we make sure in our lab here that we have numerous systems in place to ensure that this goal is met. Again, state accreditations, we have multiple, NELAC accreditation. We routinely go through third-party audits, and we participate in performance testing studies at least twice a year, all part of the accreditation process. We also have a full and independent QA team on site. We obviously have standard operating procedures for all of our processes and our methods. And we also have expert technical support from people who've been in this industry from anywhere from 20 to 40 years who can help answer some of the tougher questions. We have training. We've got multiple levels of data review. We have organized sample records and can recreate data if needed. So if anything did wind up in court and it was from 3 years ago, we can pull that data. We have a comprehensive LIMS system here. We can basically create a push-button data package for you if need be. Because we have automated deliverables, and we have this total access web service that allows you to access your data as quickly as possible. And just a little bit about Eurofins Calscience. Eurofins is a global company. Eurofins Calscience, as Calscience, was founded in 1986. The main lab is in Garden Grove. Irvine has now rolled up under the Calscience name under Eurofins. We used to be Test America Irvine. We're still here. Our name has just changed. Between the two labs, it's a comprehensive portfolio of analytical methods. Your stormwaters, your wastewaters, groundwater, seawater, air, sediment, soil, tissue, we can do it all because our clients need it because they come from a diverse range of consultants, private industry, and governments. Calscience has built their reputation on client service, on quality, consistently delivering on-time results and offering rush turnaround times that our clients have really come to rely upon. And we hope that if you don't use us now, you will consider using us in the future. Again, we are all over the country. There's a lot of divisions of Eurofins in California. We are here. If you're doing stuff in the North Bay, if you're doing stuff in the South Bay, we're here. Just let us know. Work with our project managers and our bids and proposal people. Let us know how we can help you, whether it's stormwater or something else. I know we've probably got about 5 or 6 minutes left. I'm here to answer any questions that you guys might have regarding analytical testing in general, stormwaters specifically.
Yes, actually, there are a couple of questions that have popped up in the chat. So thank you. That's a very comprehensive presentation. One question. In your opinion, what is the most challenging item in attaining ELAP certification?
Most challenging item in attaining ELAP certification. Wow. I think it's making sure that your training, your procedures and your training plan are suitable for what you're trying to do. You're going to take a bunch of people and teach them how to run, very sensitive instrumentation and make sure they all do it the same way and make sure they can all generate data in the same way. So being able to demonstrate competency, that's critical. But making sure you understand your methods, have your documentation practices in place and your training plan, and that everybody's following it. So you're going to have to follow that up with a strong QA system. So I have always worked for ELAP and ELAP certified labs. I have never had to get a lab certified. I've always had to maintain certification. So my experience is making sure that those plans continue to work the way they're supposed to.
Wow, thank you. And the next question is, are you an approved Pyethroid testing lab meeting the Water Board water quality objectives? Also, do you have acute or chronic toxicity testing?
Okay, so we don't do pyrethroids here. I can check with the Garden Grove lab. At one point in time, they did an extensive list of pyrethroids because they deal with sediments and tissues and things like that over there as well. Acute toxicity or bioassays, no. That is one method that we must subcontract out. We tend to use labs up in Ventura. There's a couple of specialty labs. We also have a sister lab division up in Oregon that can do the bioassay testing. But again, that's another one of those, got to get it started within like 48 hours. If you're going to kill fish, you want to kill them right away, I guess.
So what makes Pyethroid testing such a challenge?
It's extremely sensitive. The analytical instrumentation, you've got a lot of colluding compounds, a lot of compounds that are similar in structure. It's just the time. It's not requested frequently. So a lab's not going to invest a lot of money into method development stuff if they're not going to get revenue out of it on the back end. So I know Garden Grove set it up because of their marine chemistry division, and it is in tissues and things like that. They do look for it there. But for us here in Irvine, not requested frequently. Standard chlorinated pesticides and PCBs are pretty much kind of our bailiwick here.
And Linda, this is John Tarascus here. You're probably absolutely right that it's more a regional issue. I know we're out of the Central Valley, and the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board is requiring pyrethroid testing of municipalities now. And the water quality objectives are so low that I believe there's only 3 or 4 laboratories that have been approved and have demonstrated they can actually achieve that. So it could be just a function that our local regional board is requiring that.
Simi Valley as well.
Oh, Simi Valley, yeah, which is north of the San Fernando Valley. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, especially in the Central Valley with all the ag work and stuff you guys have out there, that makes sense. They would be doing that. But I would have to check with Garden Grove on their limits to see if they meet them. Again, sediment and tissues, ocean plan type stuff, marine chemistry, it all ties together eventually.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Working in the labs, as long as you have, what would you say would be the most common mistake that stormwater samplers, when they bring their kits in, what would be the most common avoidable mistake? What do they do?
They don't label their containers, or they don't complete their COC properly. Those are the two biggest things that we see. We literally get containers in here sometimes, and another thing, which is not as frequent, they'll sample in like 7-Up bottles, or containers that aren't specifically meant for analytical testing. We provide you the containers because they're clean. We know they're clean. They come with certificates of compliance down to certain reporting limits. So you'd want to use the containers we provide. But sometimes I think guys are in the field and it starts to rain, and whatever they have in their truck, they grab the sample with. So proper containers, completed chains of custody, and labeling your containers.
So if they were to bring in a non-certified container, would you just make a note on the COC that was unacceptable and you were unable to process that?
Well, we would probably still proceed with processing it. If it's not the proper container, we would note that, contact you, say, what would you like us to do? If it's going to rain a lot, you may choose to not do that event and do another one with right containers. Just depends on what you need to do.
I know that some labs for VOAs, for volatile organic analysis vials, they require 2 VOAs for a lot of tests, and some require 3 VOAs. In your approach, which do you guys prefer, 2 or 3 VOAs, and why?
3 VOAs is normally what we request. What happens is, you have to collect them in the field without any headspace. Now, the minute we analyze your sample, you're filled up a 40 ml VOA full. We're going to analyze it, and the instrument's going to take 5 to 10 ml out of that vial automatically and analyze that aliquot. That means you now have 5 or 10 ml of headspace in the vial. So technically, we wouldn't reuse that vial. So by giving us an extra vial or 2, it allows us to reanalyze your sample. If there's an instrument failure, if there's a power failure, if there's something wrong with the sample itself, if dilutions are needed, something like that. So it's kind of a backup. It allows us more flexibility in the lab to get you what you need.
In our stormwater training, one of the things we tell our clients is try not to flush out your preservative. For example, oil and grease. You have, most labs use hydrochloric acid, some use sulfuric acid solution. By the way, out of curiosity, which do you prefer, HCl or H2SO4?
It doesn't really matter. We provide normally hydrochloric acid here.
Okay, that's common. Now, the question is, let's just say they grab a sample of oil and grease, but they kind of wash out their preservative. Is that the end of the road for that bottle, or can you add some more acid to it when you receive it in? Is it unredeemable, or can you fix that?
Well, by the time your sample gets to us, quite honestly, for oil and grease, I don't know that the preservative is all that critical. We would probably go ahead and process your sample as is and just make a note if it didn't meet the pH, it wasn't less than 2. And at that point, then we'd have to determine how usable that data is. I mean, if it's high levels of oil and grease, even though it's not preserved, and you're well over your permit limits, does it really matter at that point? So we wouldn't re-preserve it in the lab unless you brought it into us and said something, and we could preserve it immediately. Chances are we wouldn't re-preserve it.
And this is John Charauskas. I know the Water Board and even the US EPA has made a big deal about no intermediate containers for oil and grease and VOCs, but especially oil and grease and the IGP. There has been talk, I've heard consultants talk about actually submitting the analytical container as a part of the collection device, I should say, as a part of that sampling. Have you heard of anything like that, or where they're actually doing maybe smear or a wipe sample on the collection device? Have you heard anything like that?
We have not seen that here at this point. It rained back in like February, and that's really kind of the last of what we saw. But we have not, nobody's approached me to say, hey, we want to send you our collection device. Can you do a wipe sample on it? So, yeah, I mean, okay. You could maybe collect an equipment blank in the field using that container.
Right.
I have a follow-up question. This is Aaron, concerning composite sampling. the composite sample, you have to get sample kits from several different locations, and my understanding is the lab puts into that giant beaker unit that they mix it all together for the aliquots to be equal to get a representative sample. How do you do that with oil and grease if you're not supposed to use a secondary container?
We would probably not composite your sample for oil and grease. If you're collecting in an ISCO or doing something like that for non-stormwater type stuff, I mean, it could composite for you, but for oil and grease, we would probably not composite them. We would probably run them as discrete aliquots unless you asked us to. And at that point, we would have to pour them into a very large container, all of the sample, rinse out each container with aliquots of hexane, and keep processing it that way.
So you said you would run them as discrete?
Probably discrete individuals, probably. And maybe you report it. But
what do you mean by that exactly?
So a discrete sample is an individual sample. Discrete samples can be composited together to give you a composite sample. So we might just run the discrete, and then you can analytically calculate results, an average or whatever you need to do there. I think it just depends on exactly what the permit states.
So you composite by basically analytical method as opposed to physically mixing the bottles.
For oil and grease, yeah, it's tough. And for VOAs, I mean, the minute you open a VOA, you've just biased your sample low potentially. And then by combining them, it just creates some uncertainty with the data, I would say, when you're asked to combine methods or composite methods that shouldn't be. Some labs might take a volumetric syringe and pierce through the top of a septa of a VOA and pull out 1 to 5 mils and transfer that into another closed septa and try to do a flow composite that way, you know, volume composite. But you're still at some point having headspace touch that sample, and things can volatilize into headspace.
Right, that's the whole point of VOA, is just to try to avoid the headspace. Well,
Yes.
I think we are coming up at the end of our workshop. Is there any last things you'd like to mention before we close up shop here?
No, on this slide at the bottom, you can see our 2 locations and phone numbers. All you got to do is call either one of them and ask for support. We can get you quotes if you're not working with us yet, get you set up with a great project manager. You can have salespeople get in contact with you, whatever you need. I'm always available. You can just ask for me if you call the Irvine phone number as well. We appreciate your time and really wish everybody great luck with this upcoming stormwater season.
Well, Linda, Camille, thank you very much. This was an excellent presentation. I think we learned quite